The pj-fleck-show is brought to you by Cub Foods and Blue Cross Blue Shield of Minnesota. It's the pj-fleck-show with Hobie Artigue, Ron Johnson, and Justin Gaard. Let's row the boat.
I'm really proud of the progress our team's making. Again, we talked about this before, a very experienced team, and so you can push them a lot more than a younger team.
2020 was up and down year for us, up and down year for everybody. We went through a lot of stuff. You're in camp and you're with each other all the time and everyone's loving being together.
Training camp, we're taking it head on. Not one guy's complained, not one guy is tired, not one guy's been late, none of that. It is just, they're taking it head on.
Well, we're going head on into the college football season as the Gophers kick off their campaign in 2021 in just about a week. But we're kicking things off with a special edition of the PJ Fleck Show alongside Ron Johnson and Justin Gaard. I'm Hobie Artigue. And guys, I have to ask you, we've been stewing on this for a long time now, but can you put into words how excited you are for a week from tonight?
I mean, it's Ohio State, so of course I'm excited. I mean, but it's college football. We're back. They finally got this figured out. Now there's this new, relationship, ACC, Pac-12, Big Ten. So there's a lot of things going on with college football, but honestly, it's football, so it's just good to be back to it.
I'm just glad I can look directly in your eyes. I can look directly in your eyes. A year ago, we were staring at the screen like the rest of you, trying to figure out where everybody was 6 feet apart. So I'm just glad that we're this close, Ron. It's beautiful.
Like Dave Chappelle said, like Prince, you cannot look directly into the aura, though.
No, I never want to stare at it. No, I won't.
Well, one thing we know is that there will be college football this season for the Gophers. At this time last year, it was still a big question mark. And another thing that we know is that, Mo knows how to make an impact, something that Mo Ibrahim will hopefully replicate this year. Last year, he rushed for the second most yards per game in FBS, along with 15 touchdowns, the fifth most in college football, and guys, they only played in 7 games. Ibrahim, one of the top rushers in that short season a year ago. And so often, though, the team went, the offense especially went with how much he did. Do you think that's going to be a similar story again this season, Justin?
I do. We're going to talk about wide receivers a little bit later because I think that's where the question marks are for this team. In terms of quarterback and running back, there are no question marks. And what I like about this year's running back stable is that there's actually legitimate options behind Mo because they ran him into the ground at times last year. He was banged up at times last year, and eventually they had him on kind of a carry count towards the end of the season. So he deserves every accolade that he gets. He's an awesome young man. He's a great player. He's a great leader. One of my favorite guys in my 11 years, just watching him because he's so patient. He's so small. Yeah. And you kind of lose him behind those offensive linemen, but he's set up for a terrific year. And the cool thing is they actually have some options behind him too.
Yeah, I think the thing we forget is we were so used to receivers. Tyler Johnson, Rashad Bateman, and then Chris Altman-Bell was just the third. Well, now this team is starting to look like a Glenn Mason team with Marion Barber and Lawrence Maroney. I mean, it's going to be a running back-driven team. They're going to throw some play action, here and there. Chris Altman-Bell hopefully get them back. But, I mean, if you think about the receivers under that tutelage when you had Marion and Maroney, it wasn't guys like Tyler and Rashad, and Mason still found a way to win 10 games. So PJ can get this done. Why? Because when you run the ball, there's less likely for interceptions, probably no interceptions if you run the ball, and less likely to have a long game because the clock's going to keep running.
You mentioned those interceptions, and Tanner Morgan last year, it was kind of a different story from what we saw in 2019. He had 7 touchdowns, but also 5 picks last year. Ron, how does he get back to the Tanner Morgan that we all saw back in that Outback Bowl season? Granted, he did have a pair of receivers in Rashad Bateman and Tyler Johnson, something he might not have this year.
Yeah, and I go back to Tanner Morgan's game, and rest in peace to his dad, Ted. He and I talked after that game against Wisconsin, and there was a route combination where you had a post and you had a dig. I don't know who was wrong, but the receivers didn't seem like they were in the right spot, and Tanner looked like he threw it to the wrong guy. And Tanner's dad, I'll never forget this tweet. He tweeted or DM me and said, hey, I don't know if Tanner should have threw that ball. And I was like, I don't think he should have either. Yeah. And then we kind of questioned what was the play call, what was his progressions during the week. But Mike Sanford Jr., that was the problem. They didn't have an offseason.
Right.
Sure.
And so I think a lot of that's going to get fixed simply by having an offseason where Sanford Jr. can explain a little bit more to Tanner. Here's my offense. This is what I want out of it. We know that it's a check with me offense where they look to the sideline. Well, if you haven't worked on it, check with me is hard. And so I think that's going to get fixed.
Well, 2 years ago, Tanner had Kirk Shiraka's offense pretty much mastered.
Yep.
He knew all the answers. He knew where he was supposed to go. He knew all the checks. There were times last year where you could just tell play wasn't coming in as quickly. Mike Sanford didn't know Tanner very well. Rashad is in, Rashad is out, Mo's in, Mo's out. There was so much instability last year. I do think that just having that stability this offseason and year 2, I think they all understand each other a lot better now.
Speaking of Mike Sanford Jr., last year they were doing meetings like how we were doing the show in some instances last year. Right. So much virtual. Now, Ron, being in person with more pieces to work with in the offense, what do you think the next step for the offense looks like?
Well, one, you're going to get to have those face-to-face conversations like JG said. And people think that that's not a big deal, but it's a huge deal when you can sit next to your quarterback and just have a conversation as you're watching film. Mm-hmm. When you can sit next to a running back and quarterback and they can talk about, hey, if this blitz comes, we're going to do this. And the coach can change it right away, like, hey, even watching film together right now, this looks stupid. Let's change it. And I think that's the things that we forget were missed because you didn't have that impromptu conversation, that quick change where offensive coordinator and offensive line coach can change some stuff up. And I remember the offensive line coach actually came to my house to buy bracelets for my daughter Cameron, and we talked about that. And Callahan and I talked about how is that? How is the virtual? How is that conversation about pass progressions and all that stuff? He said it's hard. Mm-hmm. He's like, it's tough when I can't grab an offensive lineman and tell him this is what you should do right now. And I think that's the key.
Well, and you learn how your players want to be coached. Mike Sanford told me, he didn't come to my house or anything like that, but he told me a couple of weeks ago that I didn't know how Tanner liked to learn. I didn't know how Tanner liked to be coached. I didn't know what Tanner was thinking from time to time. So the fact that they have been in person, they've been able to have more meaningful conversations, they've been able to deep dive, so to speak, I think is only beneficial. I'd say the excuses are done now. Last year, I think you can have all those excuses of new system, new receivers, Rashad's in, Rashad's out, like I said earlier. Now, everybody's back. You pretty much know who you've got. Year 2 in the system. You should be good. So we'll see how it plays out.
And you mentioned Rashad Bateman, and it's obvious the Gophers are losing some production at wide receiver, trying to replace a first-round pick coming up this year. Here's Bateman compared to the other wideouts on the roster last year, playing in only 5 games. But as you can see, there's a lot to pick up for this receiving corps with Bateman's departure. Chris Autman-Bell, the top guy, he was injured in practice a few weeks back. But here's Coach Fleck with an update on Crab.
Yeah, he's kind of moved from week to week to somewhat day to day now. And, we're excited about his progress he's making. If we're going to do what's best for Chris first, we're going to make sure Chris is healthy enough to do whatever, whether it's practice, whether it's reps, whether it's playing a game. But we'll take that.
Well, the Ohio State game, it sounds like he could be a coin toss, if you will, going into that game at this point in time. Ron, as a former receiver who stepped into spots before, what type of receiver do the Gophers need Chris Autman-Bell to be? And also, who else needs to step up behind him to make sure that passing game really gets flowing like it has in the last few years?
Well, this is a long season, and we know Ohio State's a tough task. If he can't go, if he's not 100%, this is not a team you want to go out there on one leg with. This is a team that you need to be at full strength. I would rather have 3 full-strength receivers than a Chris Autman-Bell at 50 to 70%. Why? Because he can get even more hurt playing against these guys. These are elite defensive players on Ohio State's defense, and you do not want to go in there. I mean, I remember playing against guys like Andy Katzenmoyer and Nayal Diggs and, what's his name, Nate Clemens. That's the thing with Ohio State. They're always going to have these top guys. I think Von Miller just said that. Ohio State guys that he's seen are great. So with Chris Autman-Bell, he could be a decoy. Now, if he's good enough to get out there and go a little bit, maybe use him as a decoy. They know he's your deep threat. They know he's your 50-50 ball guy. So maybe use him as a deep guy and send some guys underneath to kind of get the offense going. But again, I'm going to go back to the run. It's going to be a running day. That's the way to get this game and keep it in control.
I agree with all of that. If he's not 100%, be cautious with him because it's a long season. There's going to be more important games we're going to talk about. The name of the receiving corps, I want you to remember, though, not even a wide receiver. Brevin Spann-Ford, the tight end. We've been waiting on that for a long time.
For 2 years.
Yeah.
I know. I've said it before. You've said it. We've all said it. One of these years we're going to be right, and I think it is this year because of they don't have a lot of answers that we know about receivers right now, and I know they want to get tight ends more involved, and I think he can do it.
And Ron, you mentioned the running game. Good thing for the passing and the running game is that there's an experienced offensive line too. One of the most experienced in college football this season. Justin, how big can those 5 up front make a difference for this entire offense and granted this entire team really?
The cliche, you guys talk about it on the Vikings broadcast all the time, is they have to be together for a couple of years. You have to have some kind of sustainability and some stability there. They have that now. They've got 9 or 10 people that have started games in the Big Ten. 4 or 5 of them are going to be NFL players. You got a guy like Connor Olson who started every game of his career. Blaze Andrews, Sam Schluter, Daniel Faalele, who was obviously out a year ago. Curtis Dunlap, who was a starter 2 years ago, might not be a starter this year. So for what they want to do, they might rotate these guys in and out like the defensive line is going to do. So that's why people are optimistic about this team because it does start up front in the West, and I think the Gophers are right there.
And coming up after the break, we're going to be chatting about that Gopher defense, one that has much more depth this year compared to last year, along with a player that's quickly garnering attention as the season gets going. We chat Boye Mafe on that defense when we return on the PJ Fleck Show.
Row the boat. You're watching the PJ Fleck Show.
We're doing everything we can to keep building that depth because you just never know when you're going to have to play guys. And that's what this season's going to be about. There's going to be times when guys aren't available, and we got to use our depth to our advantage.
That's something the Gophers will have to do this season. Granted, they can do it this year, especially on defense. Guys, last year they really started slowly in 2020, but really found their footing at the end of the season. Guys are healthy now. You look at a Braylon Oliver. You look at some of the transfers they got in. Ron, where would you say the floor should be for this Gopher defense entering this season?
Well, getting absolutely hammered is the floor, so they cannot go there. I mean, honestly, we saw what the linebacker depth is, and my thought behind that is when I say absolutely hammered, when we saw like physical type plays, and I'm not saying guys like Boye, it's the others. He needs guys to help him. We've seen Everson, Daniil, you talk about those groups and how they needed 2 interior linemen. You have 2 all-pros and then 2 guys in the middle doing nothing. You're not going to get any production. So he's going to need help from the guys in the middle. And those linebackers become a part of that front when as far as filling the run gaps. And so that's my thought. Like, they got hammered. It can happen again, but they have to be able to play together and show some force.
But, Justin, they really did address some needs as well.
They recognized that they had some issues, and they went to the transfer portal, and there's a couple of names you should remember. Niles Pickney is one, 2-time captain at Clemson, coming up here for his final year of eligibility. He's going to play in the interior. He's very solid. And then Jack Gibbons, the tackling machine from Abilene Christian, they've said has really helped out Mariano Sori-Marin as well in that linebacker spot. So they gave up for most of the season last year, almost 9 yards per play on the ground. Every time somebody ran the ball, they were getting a first down. Unsustainable. They recognized it. They tried to improve it. And the young guys that played last year are all back, so that area will be improved.
Well, the defense did find their footing toward the end of the season, thanks in part to a big step from Boye Mafe. The Gophers defensive end burst onto the scene in 2020 with 4.5 sacks in 6 games. He continues to climb draft boards at a rapid rate right now, but the star defender says he's kind of taking it all in stride. Take a listen. So the amount of sacks you had in so few games played, I think that really jumped out. But what jumps out even more is that it seemed like almost every snap you were affecting the quarterback in some way. How would you describe your 2020 campaign?
For 2020, my biggest thing for myself, I told myself, is that just go out there and play, honestly. And it's not all about just, my pass rush or what I did on the third down, but it was more about just having guys around me helping me with the pass rush, even with interior pressure, outside pressure from the opposite end, and just having that help from everybody else. It just made it easier for me on my end. So, just that campaign was really more about having a unit, being a unit and pass rushing as all together.
You look at yourself individually, though, and I was reading pretty much everything preseason for Gopher defense, and your name is at the top, and a lot of people expect you to break out this year. How are you handling that going into this season?
I'm blessed to be in the position I am, and honestly, I think the biggest thing is that it took work to get to where I'm at. And the main thing is making sure that I'm always working, always making sure that I'm going towards the goal. You can't stop working.
And you can hear more from Boye a week from tonight, along with Tanner Morgan and Mo Ibrahim on a special 90-minute edition of the Gopher pregame show. We're on the air here on Fox 9 at 5 o'clock, live on campus and the tailgate lots ahead of that opener against the Buckeyes.
So
but guys,
excited. So excited.
Yeah, we're still a week away. Contain your excitement just a little bit. A lot of people are excited to see Boye Mafe play, especially his development over the last few seasons, and you've seen the trajectory he's on. What is the next step for him, Ron, as a defensive end who really knows how to get after QBs?
Well, he reminds me a lot of, and I'm not saying he's this guy, so please don't nominate me for any awards, but Terrell Suggs, kind of undersized, not a true defensive end. And then what people forget, just like Terrell, it takes time to put some of that grown man weight on. Like, this still is a kid. And so if you imagine him a couple years from now in the NFL, workouts, food, I feel like his size and his ability and his moves, they resemble a little bit of Terrell Suggs. And maybe it's the white and gold helmet jersey combo that's Arizona State that's maybe giving that to me. But that's what I feel like when I see him play.
And Jussie, he might be seeing more double teams this year. And he's going to get noticed whenever he's on that field.
That's the key, and it sounds so cliche, but his production is going to have a lot to do with the guys around him, right? Because hopefully they don't have to basically rely on him to get to the quarterback. Hopefully they have other guys, those defensive linemen that we talked about that played last year, some of the transfers this year. If they can get some attention as well, that's only going to help Boye.
Also, special teams, I think we have to hit on that because they really did have a rough go, Justin, last year. They only kicked 5 field goals, none made over 40 yards. The punting average was around 36 yards a punt, very down in the Big Ten. I believe it was at the bottom of the conference. Are you optimistic that things can turn around this year?
Well, I am, and same thing we talked about defensively. They recognize that they had a problem. The fact that it's been a couple of seasons since they've made a 40-yard field goal. Think about that. I'm not great at math, but you basically have to get in the red zone to have an opportunity to kick a field goal the last couple of years. So they went out, they brought in the MAC kicker of the year out of Kent State. They brought in another kid from Temple. They've had some guys in the program that they developed, and I actually ran into Emmett Carpenter, the last guy to make a 40-yard field goal for this team on campus the other week. Again, didn't come to my house, but he said he thinks they've gotten smarter about how they're working these kickers out as well. They're not burning them out during fall camp. They're being smart about when they're kicking and all those things. So absolutely that group will be upgraded.
24.7%.
What's that mean?
I don't know. That's just the
math.
math? Yeah.
Oh, okay.
I'll speak for Ron. Kickers, just go do your thing.
Yeah.
That's it.
Well, that's why I looked at you and I talked kickers. I knew he wasn't going to say much about you. We can appreciate the kickers.
He'll have a lot to say in 7 days from now. That's when Huntington Bank Stadium is going to be rocking as the Gophers start the season against Ohio State. We'll take an early look at what the Buckeyes bring to the table coming up next as we close things out on a special edition of the PJ Fleck Show.
This is Huntington! Into the pit.
Welcome back to the PJ Fleck Show.
They're very talented, very good, well coached, and they're Ohio State. So we know they're going to be good.
Well, the buzz has been building about that game for quite some time as the Gophers get set to host Ohio State to start the season. Everyone's excited right now, but also there's, guys, a challenge that comes with it, too, facing a top 4 team in the country coming in to start the season. Ron, how tough is Ohio State going to be this year? They are replacing a lot, but they have a lot of returning talent as well.
Well, the thing about Ohio State, and I'm so glad we didn't have social media when I played, because I didn't really know, other than they were ranked, top 5 or top 6 in the country. That's the only thing I knew at the time. And I knew they had a good cornerback. So right now, it's the hype of social media that these players, these freshmen see. You talk about Justin Fields, you talk about all the past stuff of Ohio State, you talk about the allure of going to the stadium. Well, 1, they're on the road, so that's one positive. We don't have to deal with their fans. 2, it's on a Thursday night, so everybody's going to be watching because it's the start of the season. But Ohio State is only going to go as far as their quarterback, and we know that. So that's the key. We really don't know. I can't give a prediction just yet because we really don't know. Give me another week to kind of review who they're going to start.
Oh, we will. Get ready.
Because they don't even know who they're going to start. So I think that's the key. They're going to go as far as their quarterback.
I believe C.J. Stroud is the guy that is going to be getting the call to go in that game.
Now, I remember what you said after you guys beat Ohio State in 2000.
It
is good. That was in public to reporters. It's great you didn't have social media back in your day, because I know you. I remember what you said just on your own there. So
I don't remember what I said last night.
Yeah, well, I remember because I ended up reading. I watched that game.
Well, let's talk about that.
I can't believe we didn't have video of that game. That would have been good B-roll. Next week we'll do that.
Yes, please. Next week, get
the nice
all
thing
the
for
highlights.
CJ Stroud.
I need a highlight tape of that too.
The next thing for CJ Stroud, what's nice for him, you mentioned it, they're receivers. They've got the best receiver tandem in the Big Ten, maybe the country. You know they're going to have a good running back. They're going to have an experienced offensive line. PJ said it at the top. There's a show on Friday nights called Enough Said that I'm a part of. Enough said. It's Ohio State. That's all you need to say, but we'll say more next week.
And Fleck said in his press conference this week that Ohio State's receiving corps might be one of the best he's ever seen in college football. We'll get into depth on that a little bit more next week on the PJ Fleck Show. But guys, also the College Football Alliance with the Pac-12, the Big Ten, and also the ACC. Justin, how do you think that's going to change the complexion of college football moving forward? Granted, it's going to be a few years away.
We think, yeah. I would say I don't have a great answer for the Alliance, because after watching the press conference with the 3 commissioners, I don't think they know exactly what the alliance is.
We're going to do this thing, though.
I know what it is.
Well, the SEC took these teams. We have to do something. We don't really know what we're going to do, but we're going to do something and we're going to work together. They're trying, I think, to stop the runaway train that is the SEC from plucking teams all over the place. I'm not quite sure what the Big Ten's motivation is to pair up with the Pac-12 and the ACC, because I think they're kind of the second power player in college football. But at some point, there'll be a scheduling aspect. This, to me, is all about voting blocks and making sure that the SEC just doesn't decide everything for everybody and that they have a little bit of strength.
I think the bigger picture is all sports. So right now we're talking football, but think about Duke being able to play in the Big Ten more. Think about California, UCLA being able to play softball a little bit more and play baseball a little bit more against Big Ten teams. I think as a whole, this is kind of a cool thing they're going to do. Football-wise, I think is that. It's how do we stop Thanos from changing the whole scope of sports? The SEC literally is Thanos. I mean, if Saban snaps his finger,
Texas and Oklahoma like the last Infinity Zone?
And so, correct. And so that's where I think it is. It's just how can we – and I think the scheduling could be better. Now, if all your preseason games are going to be Pac-12 and ACC for the Big Ten, that's a huge help to put you in that top 5, top 4 every year, where Ohio State can actually start scheduling some good games like a Florida State or something like that. And so I think it's going to be cool.
From a scheduling perspective, what does it mean for the college football playoff? I think that's a big question that a lot of people have, because if you're going to do this, expansion has to follow sometime soon.
Well, and hopefully it's sooner rather than later, and that's, I think, my one concern with this. It may have pushed it back a couple of years. There was a legitimate possibility that in 2023 we were going to have 12 teams in the playoff, which is like the one thing that all these schools, I think, have done right in the last decade, is expand that thing, get more interest in that thing, and now that might be delayed a couple more years because of this.
That's going to be the interesting thing, because if you have teams playing cross-conference midway through the season, that might kind of change everything.
I just wanted the Big Ten to go to L.A. I wanted them to get USC, UCLA. Wouldn't you like that? We've been doing the Gopher pregame show at the Coliseum in the Rose Bowl.
You get to do it there. We got to do it there.
We'd get you out there. We'd get you out there. They'd love the show.
Hope you're like on the grass.
Speaking of the show, a reminder, we're on the air right here on Fox 9 at 5 o'clock a week from tonight for a 90-minute edition of the Gopher pregame show. We'll be all over the place as the Gophers get ready to take on Ohio State. Should be a great one. But next week, the pj-fleck-show back on Wednesday. For Ron Johnson, for Justin Gaard, and Coach Fleck, I'm Hobie Artigue. We'll see you next time.